Olsen. This is the Consortium of Collective Consciousness warehouse, also my publishing office, and I would just like to tell you about my 5 books. The first book I published is called World Stompers, a Guide to Travel Manifesto. It's about traveling around the world on a low budget, and was published in 1995 originally, and now it's in its 4th edition in 1999. Did 2 books with Hunter Publishing in a series called Extreme Adventures, Northern California and Hawaii. These 2 books came out in 1997. And in March 1999, I came out with a compilation of 101 travel stories called In Search of Adventure with Bruce Northam. And what we're going to show you today are some outtakes of a lecture I'm doing for my 5th book called Sacred Places, 101 Spiritual Sites Around the World, which was also published by CCC Publishing this year, 2000, a January release.
It's really nice to have Brad Olsen back with us. He is the founder and publisher of CCC Publishing and author of World Stompers, a Traveler's Manifesto, which some of you may be familiar with. Also the Extreme Adventure series. He's also just a globetrotter extraordinaire. The man has been everywhere. In his new book, 101 Sacred Places, he tells us about the 101 most powerfully spiritual and sacred spots on the globe. It covers everything from Mount Shasta to Easter Island, the Taj Mahal to Chichen Itza, everything in between. It's a little history, a little bit about the myth, a little advice. It serves both as a guide if you're planning a trip and as an armchair travel read. That's pretty great. So please join me in welcoming Brad Olsen.
Good to be back. I did a talk here in March with a panel of travel writers from a book we did called In Search of Adventure, which was 101 travel stories. And that went pretty well. Had some nice talent here that night. Just to give you a little background on how I got to where I am and did this book, my 5th book. Early 90s, I was kind of in a slump with my life. I didn't really know what I was going to do. I just had a feeling that I should travel. And I was skiing in Lake Tahoe, and a woman said, well, if you want to travel around the world and pay for it, you should go to Japan and teach English. So just taking that advice, I got a one-way ticket to Tokyo with my backpack and a mountain bike and flew over there and just made it happen. After traveling around Japan a little bit and settling down in Kyoto, found a job and worked for a year, and then saved enough money to go on a 2-year trip around the world. And that was when I first started to become acquainted with sacred sites, at first somewhat unconsciously, but then after a while started kind of putting it all in a unified theory in a way. But the subject of traveling around the world on a low budget and teaching and extended trips is the subject of World Stompers, my 1st book, which is now in its 4th edition, and I do lectures on that time and again. So coming back from my 3-year trip with $5 to my name, I thought I wanted to come back to California. I originally grew up in the Chicago area, went to college at Illinois State University, but Midwest was just a little too away from everything. I didn't meet any foreigners when I was growing up and had this yearning to acquaint myself with the world. So upon returning from my trip, much to my parents' dismay, I decided to move out here, and when I got here, met up with several of my traveling friends from India, and together we started a warehouse here in the city called Consortium of Collective Consciousness, or CCC, as widely known, and started a little shared living situation that's worked out remarkably well. We like to throw our own kind of electronic dance party events. We just had one last Saturday that was a lot of fun. And through that, we some newer people that have come into the warehouse, we started an organization, a nonprofit group called the World Peace Through Technology Organization. And this has only been the past few months that we've been doing the Peace Tour project. And the goal of this project is to acquire the capital and get some buses and some technology and go around the world and do some live netcasts from remote locations. But it is only our 4th month in existence, so we're still building the organization and going forward with that. But our first event is going to be in April 23rd. We're going to get the permits to block off our street, Howard Street. We're calling it the How Weird Street Fair. So you all are invited to come to that. It'll be open to all, and should be a lot of fun. Some of our neighbors from Howard Street are here tonight, so we're going to do that one, and then a few events in the Bay Area, and then we'll do a tour across country, and then go international probably in 2001 or so. So in a way, this all kind of ties in with Sacred Places, because this book in many ways is like the blueprint for the Peace Tour. Places that I feel real strongly about going to and doing celebratory events that introduce technology to people that may not know all the benefits one can get out of it. And just to distinguish who we are and our cause with technology, the mission statement of the World Peace Through Technology Organization is to inspire world peace through the benevolent uses of technology. So mainly the internet, communication systems, and the good kind of technology that can actually help people, educate people, and bring us all together. So on to the Sacred Places. Why don't we turn the lights down? This first slide I'm going to show you is me on my 3-year trip around the world. This was me back in '93, having that unconscious attraction to visit these places on my way. Not really knowing why, but feeling a lot of different emotions when I was there. Not just the Taj Mahal, of course, but many along the way. And roughly my route was through Japan. I took a ferry over to China, spent a month in China, a month in Vietnam. Was one of the first travelers in Vietnam. It was quite an exhilarating experience. To Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia for a couple months. Australia, I lived and worked for 6 months, and then back up to India and Nepal. So this was about 2.5 years after leaving the States, just arriving in India. So this is a shot from my website. The site's called stompers.com, and it's a story of my 3-year trip around the world. And this was from the section called Entropy and the Traveler, because 4 months later I was much thinner than this. I've since gained my weight back, but India has a way of reducing pounds. So anyways, here's a shot of the Jamna River in Calcutta, one of the tributaries to the Ganges, but again considered sacred, and many ritual bathers all the time taking a dip. The debris here is petals from flowers, from all the leis that the pilgrims wear and then discard once they swim in the water. And another major pilgrimage site is to the city of Puri. Spent a couple weeks there. There's a temple there called the Temple of Jagannath, which no non-Hindu believers cannot enter. But the things that makes the Jagannath temple very special is that none of the caste barriers prevent anyone from going there, and historically it's always been that way. So a lot of very, very poor and desperate people wind up there in Puri, and quite a sad sight. So that's one of the main pilgrimage sites. There's also a route in northern India where the Kumbh Mela festival travels every 4 and 8 years to several cities. One of the most fascinating things about India is the amount of lost cities or abandoned cities, which are pretty much left the way they were when they were either sacked or deserted. Some of the notable ones down in the south, Hampi, up in the north, Feta Sikri, and Kahujiro are extremely interesting place to visit. Same with the caves. Some incredible cities carved right out of the caves. Of course, Sri Lanka down in the southern tip, the oldest Buddhist nation in the world. It's been divided by civil war lately, but still has some incredible ruins. Some very ancient temples from the age of the Buddha is rumored to have gone there. And then up in the north is the blending of Hinduism and Buddhism. Of course, Buddhism spread all the way across Asia to Japan, down through Southeast Asia to Indonesia. But after it went through India, only remaining in Sri Lanka, Hinduism took back India and remains so today. The Muslim invaders, which came in later centuries, came to the northern part. So most of the sacred relics, including the Taj Mahal and Feta Sikri, are relics from the Muslim age. So this is a Nepalese stupa, which is an interesting combination of Hinduism and Buddhism. This is just outside the city of Kathmandu, which is a site in my book, home to many thousands of stupas and relics and temples. Quite a fascinating city. This is the temple of Bodhanath, just outside the city, and when I was there, they had tens of thousands of butter lamps lit. It's one of the most amazing things I saw on my trip. The main focus of the beginning of this book, and the number one sacred site in the book, is the Great Pyramid of Egypt. The reason being is some of the computations that can be made in the physical positioning of the Great Pyramid are quite amazing. To start with, the Great Pyramid is aligned with the four cardinal points of north, south, east, and west. And if you look on a globe, you'll see that more landmass goes from the latitude and longitude lines coming from the Great Pyramid, anchoring in more landmass on this planet than any other place. So whoever built the Great Pyramid must have known, one, the circumference of the Earth, and two, the large bodies of land masses. I'm going to come back to this map in a second, but just show you the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx. Some things that have been coming out lately about the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx are quite fascinating. Starting with the weather markings on the Sphinx, particularly in the rear part of the Sphinx. There are gouges which are up to 12 feet deep. For a long time, the Sphinx was buried all the way up to the chin. You may have remembered some etchings from the time of Napoleon, when people were standing quite high on the Sphinx. Sand was only removed in the past 100 years or so, and then early on it was believed that the weather markings were caused by erosion or sand. But geologists have examined it quite closely and have determined that it was caused by water. Now, the Sahara Desert has been one of the most barren places on Earth for the past 9,000 years. But prior to that, it had actually been, it had sustained quite a bit of life. This is known from some of the petroglyphs found in northern Chad and southern Algeria, which date 9 to 10,000 years ago, showing scenes of wildlife, hippopotamus, elephants, so forth. So now the geologists have dated this at least 9,000 years old, making the Sphinx the oldest man-made monument on the face of the Earth. However, Egyptologists don't like this. They don't like to lose their dating system, in which they will call none of these monuments anywhere over 5,000 years old. So archaeology and geology stand in direct contradiction at the moment. But I'm under the influence that these monuments were created long before the pharaohs, in a civilization that was very high technically orientated and had some building techniques that we're only catching up to, that we're only learning today. In 1993, a German robotic engineer named Rudolf Gattenbrink maneuvered a small robot through the air shaft of the Queen's chamber. This was viewed on national TV. It was seen by millions of people. As the robot entered a previously unknown room, and upon entering this room, it found a limestone door, and on this door was a metal fitting. Well, when Gattenbrink made another robot to go in there and open the door, he was kicked out of the country. He wasn't even allowed in, actually. And nothing more has been reported on this mysterious door. Incidentally, I was in Egypt in March of '93 and had a absolutely mind-expanding experience right on the very top here, which is a story in search of adventure. But other groups have also ventured inside the Great Pyramid and had quite illuminating experiences that can't quite be described by modern science. So anyways, there's this unknown room in the Great Pyramid that Egyptologists don't want to talk about. They're not willing to acknowledge the aging of the Sphinx, and more importantly, they're also not willing to acknowledge what is below the Sphinx, and that is several subterranean chambers, interconnected rooms that also connect to the Great Pyramid, go very, very deep into the ground, and could perhaps hold some very important secrets about who we are and who built these incredible monuments. Somewhat of a Nile Gate scandal going on right now, so we'll have to keep abreast on that. I really hope that operations will take place here and be reported truthfully to the world, but there seems to be quite a bit of suppression at the moment not to allow that to happen. So I just want to go back to the map of Egypt again and show you one more thing. And this is the positioning of the three pyramids: Great Pyramid, the Chephren Pyramid, and the Mycerinus Pyramid, named after supposed pharaohs. For a long time, nobody could figure out what the positioning of these pyramids meant, until mathematicians lined up the apex of the summit and mathematically drew out the Fibonacci spiral, which connected all three of those and delineated to a spot right here on the Giza Plateau where there's an extremely deep well, almost like a fourth dimensional pole in a way, that connects on the Earth grid a series of ley lines to some of the other sacred places around the world. And this is going to be how I'll wrap up tonight's lecture, is to tell you about this Earth grid which surrounds the planet. But so after mathematically delineating the summits of these three pyramids, they were able to box it off into what is known as the solar cross. And where that led to was exactly to the right arm of the Sphinx. Go back to the Sphinx now. One of Edgar Cayce was known as the sleeping prophet. He spoke in trance of many things, including different high-tech civilizations that once existed on this planet. Most of you have heard of Atlantis or Lemuria. But particularly the Atlantean civilization, in one of Edgar Cayce's trances, were said to have built these monuments here, and also stored their records in the Hall of Records, which the chambers have been detected scientifically, although nobody will talk about them. Now, the significance of the right arm of the Sphinx is where the Golden Cross delineates exactly to, and in one of Cayce's readings, he predicted that the right arm would eventually collapse, perhaps soon, and without a doubt revealed to the world that these chambers are down there. So maybe if Egyptologists are so stubborn and they won't talk about it, the whole thing's going to fall apart. I don't really know. We'll just have to wait and see. But that's the subject of one of Edgar Cayce's trance-like states. He also mentioned that the Great Pyramid was certainly not Pharaoh's tomb, but was used for initiation, and some of the greatest names of history were said to have been initiated there, including Jesus, Moses, Thoth, Hermes. Many of the great names from the ancient times were students of Egyptian lore. So we got to cover the world tonight. I wish I could just talk about Egypt all night, but really have to move on. Of course, bordering Sinai, part of Egypt, is the Holy Land of Israel. I was just there last March, had another incredibly illuminating experience in the old city of Jerusalem, which, as small as it is, only a few square miles, is home to three of the most important religious faiths in the world: Judaism, Christianity, as well as Islam. And that's located just on the hills above the Dead Sea. If you were to go to the university up here, the top of the Mount of Olives, you can see all the way down to the Dead Sea, where in the valley, it's also the lowest point on Earth at 13,000 feet below sea level. You can see the region where the Dead Sea caves are and the scrolls were revealed, as well as the ancient city of Jericho, where they found a skull dated at 11,000 years old, which is even older than Mesopotamia and some of the Sumerian civilizations. So another country steeped in history and legend. Up to the very north, past the Sea of Galilee, where Jesus lived and grew up, at the very top there is, in the country of Lebanon, it's another very mysterious site called Baalbek, which was originally developed by a Semite race. What makes Baalbek very interesting is a wall in the back called the Triathlon Wall, containing three incredibly massive stones, each one weighing 750 tons. No crane in this modern age can even lift half that amount. Yet these triathlon blocks are 22 feet up. How they were placed there, nobody still knows. But an interesting thing about Baalbek is on top of the platform is a Roman ruin. This is very common with sacred places around the world, that other civilizations or other conquering nations would build their sacred sites upon those of previous generations, and such is the case in Baalbek. Down the southern end of the Dead Sea is Masada, and in Jordan is the rose-red city of Petra. Here's a picture of the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, this very sacred spot in Jerusalem. Inside the Dome of the Rock is actually the raw rock, where in the Bible it was described as Abraham sacrificing his son Isaac to God. And this is also where Muhammad ascended to heaven. So the Muslims have a very strong vested interest to leave this temple there, which is one of the oldest Muslim mosques and considered the third most sacred to the Muslim people, right after Mecca and Medina in Saudi Arabia. So moving right along to Asia. When I was in Israel, I took a camel ride down at the southern part of the country in the Negev desert. And our guide was very happy to tell us that this was the terminus of the Silk Road. And the Silk Road went all the way through Mesopotamia, Central Asia, to China, with the terminus being Xi'an. Xi'an is most popularly known for the terracotta soldiers, which were uncovered about 25 years ago. But there's also a series of pyramids in China that not many people know about, including a pyramid which is twice the size of the Great Pyramid, but of the same proportion and angle of slope. This series of pyramids is also considered part of the Earth grid. So an interesting thing, scattered across the landscape are all these ancient monuments, pyramids, and temples, which almost act as like a scientific instrument, perhaps a way to geomance the living energy of the Earth, or perhaps a way that masters could telepathically communicate from far distances. It's really not known, but why were these massive pyramids built? And why were they at such very important intersection points of the world? So Xi'an is one of the oldest Chinese cities. The reports of the Great Pyramids of China the earliest reports known call them very ancient. So 4,000 years ago, they were calling these pyramids very old. Up to the north is the planned out city of Beijing or Peking. It was originally begun by the Mughals when they conquered China and all of Asia up to Austria and Europe. It was in Beijing where the young Marco Polo traveled overland and was living on the court of Kublai Khan and came back giving his glowing accounts of the Mughal Empire at that time. But a very interesting thing about the Forbidden City is that it's a microcosm of the larger whole. So when they planned out the city, and this was the Ming Emperor who started the Chinese dynasty after the Mughals, much mystery revolves around how he came to plan the city of Beijing. Mystery relating to a Tibetan master who was by his side and may have helped him design this city, but it was all based on the north, south, east, west grid. And the Forbidden City itself was a microcosm of the larger whole. So this was the auspicious resident of the Son of Heaven. The art of Feng Shui plays very favorably into the design and layout of the entire old city of Beijing. So many Buddhist and sacred cities are still in China. If there's any positive side of the Chinese takeover, it's that now many of these relics are state-run museums, this being the Potala in Tibet, which had been the sacred residence of the Dalai Lama for many centuries. His personal residence was at the very top, since none should be higher, and his administrative offices for running the country, as well as a Buddhist monastery, the largest in Tibet. It is still revered and traveled to by pilgrims all over Tibet, as well as China and parts of India will come to the Potala to pay homage to the leader that had to leave. But at the time of the Dalai Lama's residence, he was revered as a living god, and just to catch sight of him would mean a cleansing of karma, similar to bathing in the Ganges River. There's a lot of mystery revolving around this exact location as well. This mountain, according to very, very old Tibetan literature, which has also been revealed since the Chinese takeover, was from an age when Tibet was much lower to sea level. In fact, only a few hundred or thousand feet above sea level before the last shifting of the plates or polar shift, in which it rose up and the Tibetan people remained at this location. There's a series of caves to be rumored underneath the Potala where the lamas had been initiated and many treasures were stored. Last report I heard was nobody was allowed down there, and it's a pretty good chance that the Chinese have looted everything they could. And moving into Southeast Asia, this is a shot of Angkor Wat, which is another very interesting blend of Buddhism and Hinduism with a fair dose of king worship. These complexes, and there's quite a few in northern Cambodia, are considered the largest religious edifices that are still in existence. One very sad state is that they've fallen into disrepair. As we can see, the roots are getting in there. While one can still get a feeling that he or she is Indiana Jones, these monuments are in big state of disrepair, but more importantly, they're being looted, and the edifices are being cut right out and shipped to Thailand for sale on the black market. So, moving along, take you to England, where 3000 BCE, 3,000 years before Christ, a group of migrants came up to England and started building circular henges all across the country, primarily in the southwest region. There are over 100 henges in England still in existence. At one time were hundreds of them. Not only stone circles,